Hello, everyone. This is Lemar Jr. And today I'll have the honor to talk with a very good friend. My guest has been talking about functional programming for a long time. He is one of the pioneers of the adoption of F Sharp and one of the world's greatest authorities on this language. His name is Tomas Petricek. Let me show you his profile in the LinkedIn. This is the URL for the Tomas Petricek's LinkedIn, and this is his web page. This is the URL to Tomas Petricek web page, and he is very famous because he's the author, one of the authors of the Fsharp.Data library, a very important library that people use to explore data using F Sharp. It will be a pleasure to have my very good friend, Tomas Petricek. Please welcome, Mr. Tomas. How are you?
Hello, thank you for the invitation. I'm doing good.
Yeah, that's a pleasure having you here. I am a big fan of F Sharp, and I started loving F Sharp because of you, man. You are such a reference for me. I've been learning a lot from your books all this year, so it's really a pleasure to have you here. So, Thomas, you have been talking about F Sharp for a long time now. The language is not that kind of mainstream language, at least not like C Sharp, I think. But it's increasingly relevant. It's getting relevance for all these years. What do you think, and what do you expect for the next years for F Sharp?
Well, I think I think the position where F Sharp is nowadays is that we're in a world where you just need to learn multiple different things. So I don't know, 10 or whatever, 20 maybe years ago, there was Java, and you could just learn Java and be happy for the next 20 years. And I think nowadays, if you look at what people use, they're just using a mix of different things. So it's not like you can do everything you want in just one language. You always need multiple. And I think F Sharp is in a perfect position to be one of the things that, if you know them, they'll make your life easier in some cases. So I think that the future for F Sharp is to sort of be an option for those who want to learn something interesting, who want to write programs with fewer bugs, or who want to write some interesting logic as part of a bigger system, for example. And it works. I think the one recent thing, maybe since I saw you last time in Brazil, is that F Sharp now has a very, very stable compiler to JavaScript, the Fable project. So now you can really use F Sharp as part of your .NET solutions, as part of your microservices solutions, as part of your web applications as well.
So I can write F Sharp code and transpile it to JavaScript. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's how it works.
Wow.
And the compiler. So if I don't know who's our audience, but I expect there will be some geeky people who will appreciate the fact that it's actually good enough that it can take the source code of the F Sharp compiler itself, which is written in F Sharp, and compile it to JavaScript, and that actually works.
Oh, that's amazing! Wow.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But there's a if you look for Fable, there's a Fable playground where you can type F Sharp code and have it run, and that actually runs in your browser.
Oh, that's amazing! So I can have F Sharp running in my browser because I'm not using something like WebAssembly. I am just transpiling F Sharp code to plain JavaScript code.
Yeah, and it integrates with all the sort of clever web technologies for Node. So it works as a webpack. I don't know what loader. I think loader is the keyword, which means that you can even actually have a single project where you have some JavaScript, some TypeScript, and some F#, and it all just sort of packages nicely and produces a single page, single component.
But I can have some advanced features like type providers working in Fable.
I'm not actually sure. I think that's a thing that's been sort of in the works. I think it may be working now, but things like the Fsharp.Data library, that's specific to .NET implementation. So that wouldn't work in Fable. But I think it might actually be possible to have type providers in Fable as well. But that's about the only thing that's tricky. You can have all the other nice things with F#, from sort of nice algebraic data types to model your logic and pattern matching. All that works.
That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. And so today, I could say that the only language that you use is F#. You can use F# for the backend and the front end. Or are you programming in another language? Are you using something different?
Well, I've actually used TypeScript recently.
Yeah.
In a project where I was part of a bigger team, and I didn't have enough time to convert everyone to F# before we started. It was a client-side project, but the project was to do some tooling for data science that would run in the browser, and you'd have if you know Jupyter or IPython notebook, it's sort of a system where you have a nice IDE in a browser that can produce charts and stuff, but it actually runs code on some sort of backend that is elsewhere hosted on a server. So we did something along those lines, and the client side was all written in TypeScript, although I did actually write a prototype of that in F#. And then the backend services were written in Python, R. There was one written in Racket. That's right.
Whoa. TypeScript is very similar to C#. It's very close. Anders Heisberg is getting some concepts to C# and moving it to TypeScript. And talking about C#, by the way, C# is getting more and more functional these years. Do you agree with that? And what can we expect of this new C# with functional features? Is that C# taking these features from F#? Do you agree with this idea?
Well, I think C# is sort of taking ideas from all sorts of things. There's quite a few functional languages. I think they did take a lot of idea from F# in the early days when it was not common to do functional programming. Now there's things like Scala, Elm, all of those have quite a lot of good ideas that C# is sort of trying to find ways of integrating. But I think what I think makes F# still different is that I think every language has sort of a natural way of doing things. So if you start thinking about a problem, you'll do it in a certain way. And in F#, whenever I start doing pretty much anything, I go and define my records and discriminated unions, so my sort of types that work as the domain model, and that sort of is really a tool for you to capture what you know about the problem more than programming. And I think that's something that's really hard to do in any other language where this isn't the primary thing. So I think I'm all for adding functional features to C# or TypeScript, but I think it's not going to really change how you do the basic things in the language. It might make it easier or sort of nicer to do an occasional functional trick somewhere. But I think that the sort of the primary way of doing programming in C# is probably not going to be affected that much.
Okay, I got it.
I think TypeScript might actually be a bit different in this, because the way people do normal programming in JavaScript, there's just a variety of different styles. So some people might use it in a very object-oriented way. Some people might use it in a more functional way. And the project I did with TypeScript, we actually did mostly use functional programming.
Yeah. You are the author of a very interesting book talking about how to implement functional programming concepts using C# and F#. But you have been talking about using functional programming with C# for a lot of years, a long time ago. So the language is not prohibitive. It's the mindset that matters, right? Is starting thinking in a functional way. So
yeah, I think sort of a hilarious anecdote that maybe not that many people know about is when people talk about functional programming, they always say that the first functional programming language, or one of the early languages, was Lisp. And the author, and that was at the time when the only programming languages around were Fortran and COBOL. And an interesting fact is that the author of Lisp, McCarthy, actually first implemented a list processing library in Fortran. And I think he was working on some project, and somebody told him, no, doing your own language is a silly idea. Nobody will use that. Just write a Fortran library. So he did that. And then later on, he actually decided, well, I'm going to try to do my own language as well as having this Fortran library. So I think that the point is you can do functional ideas even in Fortran. And in fact, a very famous computer scientist did exactly that. But then he said, well, this is actually not that nice.
But you mentioned before that the F# compiler is written in F#. So F# compiler don't use Roslyn things, anything. It's a different project. It's a completely different project, right?
Well, yeah, no, the F# compiler. So this is a sort of a mission of every programming language designer to have their language written in itself. So the F# compiler, the first version was written in OCaml, which is a language that's fairly close to F#. And it was written in OCaml for a fairly long time. And the first versions of F# were actually able to take the OCaml source code and compile it. And then the language diverged, and the compiler sort of took that F# direction, and now it's using quite a lot of nice F# unique features. The tricky thing is that it can't depend on many things. So F# compiler is a pretty standalone project that doesn't really use anything. It sort of takes a file and produces file.
But if the F# compiler was written or compatible with Roslyn, it will be easier to have support or better support in the Visual Studio and other IDEs. IDEs. Do you agree with that?
I think in principle, but the F# compiler actually has been available as a library in the sort of same sense in which Roslyn is since before Roslyn, because F# was always written in F#, and you could just sort of mark some things as public, and you had Roslyn. So there's a project called F# Compiler Services, which gives you access to all the internals. And I think that's actually, in a way, more useful than having a Roslyn implementation, because it gives you a view of the tools that are available that just better matches what you need for working with F# code. And that's what and I think also Roslyn is still pretty much sort of Microsoft specific. I think that a recent thing in F# is that it now has very good support in the JetBrains. I think Rider is the project.
Okay,
the JetBrains
IT
yeah, and that's all implemented on top of the F# compiler services, because JetBrains has their own internal structures that they just sort of import from the compiler, and they've actually contributed back to the compiler and to the compiler services project. So that's been a very helpful collaboration for everyone. It sort of produced a very, very high quality editor for F#, and it contributed to all other editors as well, indirectly through the open source project.
Yeah, perfect. The creator of F#, I never know if the right way to say that is don't seem or don't seem.
I think it's time. Well, at least that's how I've heard it.
Yeah. Don Syme, the creator of F#, is also the guy who created the generics concept in the .NET, right? So
Yeah.
He's a very talented talented person, and he knows a lot about how Microsoft works, and probably he made a good decision. Today, he is still working with F# team, or he's moved on?
He's still working on F#. I think he's now working. I don't know what exactly the internal structure of Microsoft is these days, but he's been working with Miguel de Icaza. He's the creator of Xamarin. I know Don has been involved in a project to do sort of nice mobile programming with F#. So there's this very popular project that comes from web. In the F# context, there's a Fable library called Elmish, which implements this nice. I think it's called model view update architecture, or Elm architecture. Yeah, which is a really nice functional way of doing user interfaces. And Don has been working on that and also adapting that for the mobile world.
You spent some time working at Microsoft Research, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, is that the reason why you started working with F#, or the story is different?
I actually got interested in F# earlier. I was doing well. I ended up using C#, and I was sort of in contact with the local Czech Microsoft people. So I already had good connections with Microsoft, and at university I started. We had some functional programming classes, and I got interested in functional programming. And independently, I also tried to do a project where the idea was to compile C# to JavaScript, so that you can write ASP.NET web applications in just one language and have the client side in C# as well. This was back in the web forms days.
So
I tried to do this project, and Don also had a project which was about sort of working with the .NET intermediate compiled code. So, and I was going to some conference in Cambridge, and I emailed him saying, can I stop by, and can you tell me a bit about this library? And then I went there, and we basically spent the whole day talking. I didn't go to the conference at all. And in one day, he convinced me that I should do this whole thing with F#. And that's how it started.
Yeah. It's a very good starting point. Okay, I spent a day talking with the language creator, Tom Syme, and he taught me a lot of things, and he convinced me.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I think that's how you get your first loyal customers, right? And this was at the time when I basically knew personally the whole F# community because
Yeah.
like 6 people.
But now it's getting bigger and bigger and
I'm
bigger.
big.
It's almost impossible to know all the community. And I would love to say that I started programming using C# because I had some time with Mr. Anders Heisberg, but I don't think it will be something.
Yeah. That would be quite different.
Yeah. Well, the two geniuses. We need to recognize that they are two geniuses. Recently, you wrote an article describing how to create a lightweight version of Excel with less than 100 lines of F# code. That was pretty insane and amazing.
Yeah. Well,
Can you
that
talk more about where these ideas like that come from? I will recreate Excel or something like that. This pretty insane.
well, I have to say I've been trying to come up with something else I could do in 100 lines of code, and I didn't find anything as good as Excel. But this was for a talk that I was doing at the NDC conference. So I'm sure that the listeners can find the recording somewhere if they want to watch it. And I sort of thought, and I do like doing live coding in talks, and I think it's sort of, it takes a bit of work. You have to practice quite a bit. But it's nice when something goes wrong and the audience actually learns a bit how you think about the problem because they see you debug things. So I wanted to do a live coding talk.
Are you saying that you did this as a live coding talk?
Yeah.
Uh, I
But
hate you, man. I hate you.
the trick is you just have to live code it 5 times the day before, and then you
Yeah,
remember it. And
yeah.
so I think it looks more impressive on stage than it really is. Like,
But I still hate you, man. I still hate you
but
because every time that I try to do some live coding, I forgot some symbol or thing like that, and my code just doesn't compile,
yeah,
and you get something like lightweight Excel in less than 100 lines of
it,
code.
it was very lightweight, and if you and I think that the trick is I have sort of semi-completed versions of all the individual steps. So if you watch the recording carefully, you'll see that there's sort of hidden files with partially completed versions of it.
Okay,
Plenty of
okay,
snippets. So
okay.
it's not, yeah.
So
There's a lot of preparation, but I think this is also where F#, like, this is something you can only do with F# or a similar language because you don't actually have to type that much. I think that the nice thing about F# is that you spend more time thinking than typing.
It's a very good argument to say good things. If you want to say good things about F#, you can say something like, "Okay, you spend more time thinking than typing." That's amazing. You are a very experienced programmer in C# as well. How much time and effort you would need to do the same thing that you did with F# in C#?
Well, I think in a way, there's a few different parts to that. So what I implemented was a little parser for small expressions or equations you could enter, and an evaluator for that, and then some user interface using the Elmish F# architecture. So I think the key thing that would be hard to do in C# would be the definition of these expressions, because in F# you really do this as a single type definition. So you're using this discriminated union type, which says an expression is either a number or a reference to a cell, or the application of some operator like plus, minus, times on two other expressions. And that really sort of captures the essence of what the equations are in 5 lines of code. In C#, you would probably have to do this as a class hierarchy. And it depends on how properly you do things, because for a talk, I wouldn't do it properly. But if you wanted to do it properly, maybe you'd have to do something like the visitor design pattern.
Yeah.
That kind of problem is really just suited for F#. The other things like defining the parsers, it also uses a nice functional programming trick. So it's sort of using this parser combinator library, where you say, to parse a formula, I first have to parse a bracket, then I parse a number, then I parse an operator, and you sort of compose what you're parsing. That you could do in C# as well. It would be maybe a little less nice or a little less elegant, but it wouldn't be much longer. It's more that the sort of default way of doing things in F# that you do when you're not thinking too much about how to do things will be this sort of simple functional style.
Okay, perfect. Changing the subject. You wrote a report some years ago explaining main of the key features of F# language that make it great tool for data science and machine learning. Your wife, Evelina, works with data science, and if I am not wrong, you created the type provider for OR to support her work. I'm not sure if I'm correct. What are your thoughts about the current state of the language for adoption with data science?
So I think it depends on what kind of data science do you do. And data science is a very broad term. I think in many ways, if people just want to use existing libraries, then a lot of people who do statistics use the R language. A lot of people who do more machine learning things use the Python language, and that works just fine if most of what you do is using libraries that already exist. And I think that's a very much the sort of common case of what data science means today. But I think if you're doing something that's a bit more experimental, if you're doing something where you have to come up with your own algorithms, or you want to really understand how the algorithms work, but you need to understand that, then F# is great for that, because it's very easy to express complex logic in F#, and there's plenty of nice tools for working with data, like loading and transforming data. And the F#Data library is one of those things.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You have spoken sometimes about easy ways to start using F#. You have a talk about 10 first first things that you should learn to start using F Sharp. What would be your top 3 recommendations today for anyone who wants to learn the language?
I would actually have a meta recommendation, which is to have a look at Scott Blashin's blog, F Sharp for Fun and Profit.
Okay,
where he's been writing exactly about these ideas of sort of how to use F Sharp in production. And so I think all his hints are good hints. How to do it? Well, it really depends on what kind of applications are we talking about. I think a lot of those recommendations were from the time when people were building large monolithic .NET-based systems, and that's still what some businesses do. And in that case, it's sort of nice to use F Sharp as a language for testing, or for scripting, or for writing some bits of the calculation logic that you do, and that sort of things. But I think nowadays there's also a lot of people who do microservices, and then you can just write one service in F Sharp. There's a lot of work that goes into building web things, and I think Fable is really nice developer experience. So if I was to say what's the best way of getting into F Sharp, if you just want to play with it, then I would actually say have a look at Fable, because you get all the power of web. You can pretty easily build something fun with from sort of games to little user interfaces, and the way Fable integrates with Webpack gives you this really nice live reloading experience. So you edit your code in F Sharp, you save it, switch to the browser, and there it reloads automatically, which is really nice for learning because you just immediately see what you did.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And only asking something for a functional programmer to get an answer or something like my recommendation is not a recommendation, it's a meta recommendation. So only functional programmers can think in this way.
That's what you get for inviting functional programmers to your interviews.
F Sharp would be a good choice for anyone who wants to start learning about functional programming, or would you recommend another language?
I think F Sharp is pretty good for that. It's not the most pure language, but I really like the fact that you can just do fun things with the language. So when I was getting into functional programming, I really liked the fact that I could do web programming at the time when no other functional language was able to do that. Now I really like the fact that you can access all sorts of fancy JavaScript things. Like you can do 3D graphics with JavaScript from Fable. And I think it's just really fun thing to do. If you want to sort of understand functional programming language theory, then there's other languages to look at. Haskell is one which people like, mainly because it's pure, so you can't do any side effects, and it really forces you to think in that way. Some people would really recommend Lisp, which has this sort of meta programming idea where you can write code that manipulates the code you wrote, and that lets you do some really crazy, interesting things.
Yeah, I started again I restarted to read the structure and interpretation of computer programs, and they use Scheme as the language. Yeah, it's a Lisp flavor. Flavor of Lisp, I think. But it's strange because, when I do some attempts to do functional programming using Lisp, and then F sharp, looks like I'm using two different worlds with two different set of concepts. Looks different. And when I've been learning and trying to learn Haskell for a long, long time, but it's really hard to get something useful using Haskell and pure functional programming concept. It's not something easy to do. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would personally agree. I think getting started with F# to build fun things is just easier. I know that Haskell does have their own web frameworks, and there's things that let you do real world Haskell applications as well. I think it's just not the sort of primary thing that people would write tutorials about.
Yeah. Yeah, because to write code in Haskell, you need to know what are you doing, and it's not pretty easy. It's not something easy for starters. Talking about starters and Kahir and things like that, what would be your advices for those who want to advance and improve their skills as computer programmers? What would be your recommendation to someone to get improved writing code?
Well, I think that the answer you expect me to say is just learn F#, right? That's what you get when you invite an F# person. They'll just tell you learn F#. It will solve all your problems. And I think there's some truth in that. But I think more generally, it's learning. Programming is the kind of field where you just have to learn a lot of different things, and so learning anything is a good thing to do if you have a free evening. And yeah, I think functional programming languages are one interesting area, but I don't really think it matters too much what you learn. I would just sort of say learn something that's outside of your comfort zone, something that you wouldn't normally do, because you might find that it actually implements ideas that will appear in one of the popular JavaScript frameworks in the next few years.
Yeah. The biggest change from the last time we saw each other is that now you're a father of two, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have enough time to learn something new besides of being a better father, but what are you learning right now? Are you spending some time learning some new technologies?
So Illustrate. I just got this book.
Okay.
This way.
The low-tech design. Oh.
So I only just started reading this, but I thought I'd show it because I think one thing I've been really interested in is sort of design and architecture, not in the software sense, but in the actual original sense of the word. So this is one of the books that I've been recently reading that talks about design and architecture. And I think there's already sort of the famous case is design patterns, which is an idea that actually got into software from architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something I'm really interested in, because architects and urban planners and designers have quite a lot of experience with sort of dealing with complex systems.
Mm-hmm.
So urban planning is especially the case where you just have to deal with something that's as complex as a city, and figuring out if you make some change in the system, what will be the consequences? If you're talking about a city, it's really hard. And I think it's kind of the same with software, where you often have very complex systems that aren't just about the software, but it's also about all the human users of it and all the sort of people that get affected by the software. So I really think it's a sort of interesting source of ideas about how we can better control the complexity in software systems. So this book I just got, but I have to say I'm on like page 3. But the idea is that it's looking at various indigenous ideas from building. There's plenty of pretty pictures. I think the cover picture is and I don't know where. I think this might actually be from somewhere in South America, but as I say, I haven't got very far. But it's some culture where they build bridges by, I think, growing or sort of affecting how trees grow. So you'll actually end up having a growing bridge.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
The more general idea of the book is we should not just sort of ignore the indigenous methods of solving problems that have been working amazingly well for hundreds or thousands of years. We should find ways of learning from those.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You have a plenty of books behind you. And I saw in your website that you have some books recommendation. This is your first book, I think, the real world functional programming using C# and F#. Oh, and you wrote this with John Skeet?
He was involved in that partly. So it was maybe 80-20%.
So. And we have some different books here. We have domain modeling made functional, fund and profit ebook. That one's pretty amazing. Is there some special recommendation or some special book recommendation besides of this short list here? Something that you would recommend for anyone? Something that people should read when you start thinking about functional programming and things like that, besides of your books?
Yeah, well, I don't really know all the F# books these days, so I can't comment on sort of what would be the best book. As I was saying, the community is now so big that I don't even know all the books on F#.
But I think not specifically about F#. Can you recommend any functional programming book?
I don't even know how I got into functional programming. I think I got some book on the ML language back when there were no F# books. So I don't know. I think it really depends on. I think there's no good answer to that in general, because it really depends on what background people have. If you're sort of eager to learn functional programming just for the sake of functional programming, then you would end up choosing a different book than if you want to learn it because you're interested in domain modeling, or because you're interested in, or because you're a good C# programmer. So the books that were listed there was the book I wrote, which really says if you know C#, you know quite a lot of things already. And rather than telling you forget everything, start from scratch, I'm going to tell you how these ideas actually map to the functional world. I think the book by Scott Vlashin, the domain modeling one, is if anyone has done any domain-driven development, they'll find F# explained in that language.
Are you talking about this one, domain modeling made functional?
Yeah.
That looks great. Yeah,
but I know Matthias Brandender has also written a book on F# for machine learning, and if people are interested,
I tried to read that book, but I am not smart enough. I read the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then I got in trouble because my background's not so good to understand these ideas. Probably I should try again, but
there's some books where you just have to sort of take it in small doses.
Yeah. And I tried to read from cover to cover, but it was not easy, at least not for me. So, but Matthias is a very nice guy, a very smart guy. And of course, it will be very nice to learn from him. But Thomas, the best answers are almost always those given to questions that I have not been asked. What should I have asked you and not asked? And what would be the answer?
That's a.
I'm trying to look like a functional programmer.
Yeah. This is a higher order function.
Yeah, a higher order question here.
Provide an answer to any question.
Choose the question and provide the answer for this question.
Yeah. Let me see. What would be the answer I want to give? Well, obviously learn F#, right? No. Okay. that one I think that one I've already said very clearly. I can tell you other things I'm interested in, which you haven't asked about. So one thing I've been interested in is history of programming, which I think is a pretty fascinating topic. And I think that the one thing I sort of like about it is that when you go back, you realize there were all these sort of other directions in which things could have gone that we're just ignoring because the community went in a certain way, and that's where we are. So I do think looking at the history of programming is a fun thing to do as well, because it lets you sort of imagine that maybe we could have been doing things in a very different way.
Yeah. At some point, I started to think about this as well, because when all this mobile movement came back and we started seeing something like Objective-C again, I started thinking, oh my God, it's so different from C++ and try to solve the same problems that C++ tries to solve. And, sometimes I start thinking, what if Steve Jobs had more success in the past, influencing developers? So maybe today, instead of C++, we could be using everybody Objective-C or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's a nightmare. I need to confess you.
Or we could have been all using COBOL still.
Yeah. Or writing functional programs using Fortran.
Right. Yeah.
If the guy who created this language, that's insane. That's insane.
But some of the fun things you find when you look at the history is all these advertisements for a programming language, a programming system called Flowmatic, which will virtually eliminate all your need for coding.
From time to time.
1958 or something.
From time to time, people start talking about you should stop learning how to code because you don't need to code anymore. So today you have the no code, low code movement, and now have artificial intelligence is writing code, and people is getting crazy about this, all these things. Let's see. Maybe this time we should start looking for another job, another occupation. But I don't think so.
I think it really sort of knowing a bit about history really gives you different perspectives when you encounter things like this. When you see it and you're like, well, people have been saying exactly the same thing 60 years ago.
Yeah,
and sure, things have changed and improved since then in quite significant ways. It's just not exactly in the same ways in which it was originally imagined. Like this when they say eliminate your need for coding, this was at a time when programming was different thing than coding. Programming was, you were the mathematician who wrote the formulas, and this is 1960s, so this was generally a male mathematician. And then they had coders who were typically women who were actually tasked with encoding these formulas to program code. And the slogan is saying, we will eliminate all your need for coding because this programming language is so easy that even the mathematician can just do it directly. and this is really a fun part of history because it's also one where women were doing all the hard coding work, partly because nobody really expected it was that hard. So if this was expected, then the male mathematicians in the sort of position of power would want to do it themselves because they think they have to do all the hard things. But nobody expected that programming would be so hard. So they asked, or that was a woman job, and lots of the early programming women pioneers were doing amazing tricks just to make programs run.
Yeah, that's amazing. Learning the history is it's the best way I know to not to do the same mistakes, and learning from the past is the better way to improve the way we do things. And it's nice to recognize that in the story of the computer science thing, women who wrote the most of the code, and that proves that that proves that they know how to do everything, and all this male stuff, alpha male stuff, just don't make sense.
There's also, I think, in one of the books I've read, there was this reference to this 10x programmer myth, which I think originated from some study that I think somebody like IBM or whoever did. But the number of programmers they studied for this experiment was like 20. So this whole myth of someone being a 10x programmer is something that has no reasonable basis whatsoever.
Yeah, the 10x programmer. You can be a 10x programmer only if you write code using F#. That's correct.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I used to be 1x programmer, and now with 2 children, I'm like 0.2x programmer.
Thomas,
because you can't write any code if you're falling asleep.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Thomas, it's really nice to talk with you. I am a big fan of your work. Your work and Evelina works is amazing as well. I've been learning a lot from you all these years, and I would like to say thank you very much for accepting coming here and talk with me about functional programming and a lot of subjects. It's really a pleasure to learn from you, Mr. Tomas Petricek.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Okay. And people, please subscribe the channel and activate the notifications. Look, that I am a YouTuber right now, inviting people to come and subscribe the channel. Subscribe the channel, and thank you very much. See you soon.